The summer camp had been running for 30 years. Pinecrest Summer Camp sat on the edge of a lake in the forests of northern Wisconsin. It had the particular atmosphere of places that had been the same for a very long time. The same cabins in the same positions around the same lake, the same schedule of activities that had barely changed since the camp first opened, the same smell of pine and lake water and wood smoke that former campers described with immediate recognition decades after their last summer there. It was a good place. Most of the counselors who worked there said so without hesitation. Most of them. Cabin 7 was the oldest structure on the campgrounds. It had been there before the camp itself, a pre-existing building that the camp's founder had incorporated into the original layout rather than demolishing. It was slightly larger than the other cabins and positioned at the edge of the property furthest from the lake, where the tree line began and the forest pressed close against the back wall. It had 6 bunks, 3 on each side, enough for 12 campers and 1 counselor. This was the configuration the camp had used for 30 years. But in the summer of the camp's 31st year, a new counselor named Daniel was assigned to Cabin 7 and noticed something on his first night that nobody had mentioned during his orientation. There were 7 bunks, not 6. 7, 3 on the left side, 3 on the right side, and 1 at the far end of the cabin, pushed against the back wall, positioned between the 2 rear windows that looked out into the trees. He counted them twice. He went to the camp director the following morning and mentioned it. The director looked at him for a moment. Then she said there were 6 bunks in Cabin 7. Daniel said he had counted 7. The director said she had been running this camp for 19 years and there were 6 bunks in Cabin 7 and there had always been 6 bunks in Cabin 7. She walked to Cabin 7 with him and opened the door and looked inside. 6 bunks, 3 on each side. The back wall was empty. Daniel stood in the doorway and looked at the back wall. He said nothing. He went back to his duties. That night, he lay in his counselor's bunk and listened to the 12 campers in his cabin sleep and looked at the back wall in the dark, empty. He told himself he had miscounted on the first night. He told himself he had been tired from the drive up and the long day of orientation, and that tired people miscounted things. He closed his eyes. At some point in the night, he woke. He did not know what had woken him. He lay still and listened. The cabin was quiet except for the breathing of 12 sleeping children. He looked toward the back wall. There was a bunk there. He could see it clearly in the thin light coming through the rear windows. The frame, the mattress, the pillow. He sat up. He looked at it for a long time. Then he got up and walked to the back of the cabin. He stood in front of the bunk. Up close, it was completely solid. He put his hand on the frame, cold metal under his fingers, real and present, and entirely there. He looked at the mattress. There was an indentation in it, the kind of indentation a mattress developed after being slept on regularly over a long period of time. The shape of a body pressed into the surface over many nights. A small body, a child's body. Daniel stood at the back of Cabin 7 in the middle of the night and looked at the indentation in the mattress of a bunk that was not supposed to exist. He went back to his own bunk. In the morning, the back wall was empty again. This happened every night for the first 2 weeks of the summer. Daniel stopped reporting it to the director after the second time she walked over and found 6 bunks. He started asking questions instead. He asked the older counselors about Cabin 7. Most of them said nothing unusual. It was the oldest cabin. It was a little cold even in summer. The trees made it darker than the others. Then he found a counselor who had worked the camp for 9 years. Her name was Patricia. He asked her about cabin 7. She was quiet for a moment. Then she asked him if he had seen the 7th bunk. He said yes. She sat down. She told him what she knew. She said it had happened before his time, before her time even. Early in the camp's history, a child had gone missing from cabin 7 during the 2nd summer the camp operated. A boy, 8 years old. He had been there at lights out and gone by morning. The camp had been searched. The lake had been searched. The forest had been searched. He was never found. His bunk had been removed from the cabin after that. Patricia looked at Daniel steadily. She said every counselor who had been assigned to cabin 7 for any length of time had seen it come back. She said the camp director knew. She said the camp director had stopped talking about it because talking about it had never made any difference. She said the bunk came back at night and was gone by morning and had been doing this for nearly 30 years. Daniel asked her if she knew the boy's name. She said she did. She told him. Daniel went back to cabin 7 that night. He waited until the campers were asleep. He walked to the back of the cabin. The bunk was there. He stood beside it. He said the boy's name quietly into the dark. Nothing happened. He stood there for a long time. Then he did something that he could not entirely explain afterward. He straightened the pillow. He smoothed the indentation in the mattress as best he could. He said quietly that he hoped the boy was all right. He went back to his own bunk and lay down. In the morning, the 7th bunk was gone. It did not come back for the rest of that summer. Daniel never told anyone what he had done, but every counselor assigned to cabin 7 in the years that followed reported the same thing. The bunk came at night and left by morning, except for one summer. The summer after Daniel straightened the pillow. That summer it did not come at all, and the counselor assigned to cabin 7 that year said it was the first time in 9 summers that the cabin had felt entirely still at night, entirely quiet, as though something that had been waiting for a very long time had finally found what it needed and been able to rest. The cabin had been in Lisa's family for 40 years. Her grandfather had built it himself in the mountains of northern Montana. He had spent 3 summers on the construction, doing most of the work alone on weekends and vacation weeks, and the result was a solid and unpretentious structure that reflected his character precisely. It was not beautiful, but it was built to last, and it had lasted. And 4 decades of family summers had given it the particular warmth of a place that had absorbed a great deal of living. Lisa had been coming to the cabin since she was 4 years old. She knew it the way you knew a place you had spent your entire life returning to. Every sound it made, every way the light moved through it at different hours, the smell of it in summer, and the different smell of it in the first days of fall, when the temperature began to drop at night and the wood stove was lit for the first time in months. She had never been afraid of the cabin. Not until the October she went up alone. She was 34. She had recently come through a difficult period, and she needed quiet in the specific way that only the cabin could provide. She told her family she was going for a long weekend. She drove up on a Friday afternoon, arrived as the sun was going down, lit the stove, made food, and sat on the porch in the cooling dark and felt the tension of the previous months begin to loosen its grip. She slept well that first night. The second night the knocking began. It was just past 2 in the morning. 3 knocks on the front door. Slow, deliberate, evenly spaced. Lisa sat up in bed and listened. The cabin was in an isolated position. The nearest neighboring property was 4 miles down the mountain road. There was no reason for anyone to be at her door at 2 in the morning. She sat still and waited. 3 more knocks, same rhythm, same pace, as though whoever was outside had all the time in the world and was simply making their presence known without urgency. Lisa got up. She did not go to the door. She went to the window beside the door instead and looked out through the glass into the dark. The porch was empty. The clearing in front of the cabin was empty. The tree line beyond the clearing was dark and still, no one visible anywhere. She stood at the window for several minutes. Nothing moved outside. She went back to bed. She lay awake for a long time listening to the cabin. It was silent. She slept eventually. In the morning she walked around the outside of the cabin, looking at the ground. The earth in front of the door was soft enough to hold impressions. There were no footprints, not approaching the door, not leaving it. The ground in front of the porch was undisturbed. Lisa stood and looked at it for a long time. Then she went inside and made coffee and sat at the kitchen table and looked at the front door. She thought about the 3 knocks. She thought about the empty porch. She thought about the ground with no footprints in it. She spent the day hiking and came back in the early evening and made dinner and sat by the stove and read and told herself she was not going to think about it. She went to bed at 10. She woke at 2:15. 3 knocks, same rhythm, same pace. She lay in bed this time and did not get up. She lay perfectly still and listened. After the knocking stopped, the cabin was completely silent for a long time. Then she heard something she had not heard the previous night. After the knocking, a voice, faint, coming from directly outside the front door. She could not make out words, only the tone of it. It did not sound threatening. It sounded like someone asking something, a question delivered in a tone of patient inquiry, as though whoever was outside simply wanted to know something and was prepared to wait for an answer. Lisa did not answer. She lay in the dark until the voice stopped. Then she lay there until it was light. She packed her things in the early morning and drove down the mountain. She called her mother from the road. She described what had happened. Her mother was quiet for a long time. Then she said something Lisa had not expected. She said her grandfather had described the same thing. The knocking at 2 in the morning, the voice afterward, the question-shaped sound of it. Lisa asked when this had happened. Her mother said her grandfather had mentioned it several times over the years, always in the same matter-of-fact tone he used for everything. He had said it happened occasionally when he was up at the cabin alone. Lisa asked if he had ever opened the door. Her mother said no. She said he had told her once that he had considered it, that the voice did not frighten him exactly, that it sounded like someone who genuinely needed something, but that he had decided long ago that there were questions it was better not to answer, and doors it was better not to open, and that some things that came knocking in the night were best left on the other side of the wood, no matter how patient they were, no matter how long they were willing to wait. The 4 of them had rented the cabin for a week in August. 2 couples, old friends from college, who had made a habit of an annual trip somewhere remote, a different destination each year. This year it was a cabin on a lake in the forests of northern Minnesota, chosen because it was genuinely isolated and genuinely quiet, and because all 4 of them had spent the previous year in the specific kind of exhausting busyness that made genuine isolation feel like a necessity. They arrived on a Sunday afternoon. The cabin was exactly what the listing had described. Simple, comfortable. A main room with a kitchen and a wood stove and a table large enough for 4. 2 bedrooms, a porch running the full length of the front of the cabin facing the lake. The lake was the selling point. It was small and private. The rental listing had described it as accessible only through the property, which meant they would have it entirely to themselves for the week. It was deep and dark in the way of northern lakes, fed by underground springs rather than surface water, and it sat in the morning light with the particular stillness of water that was rarely disturbed. They put their bags down and opened beers and sat on the porch and looked at the lake and felt the week ahead of them open up like something they had all needed for a very long time. The first 2 days were everything they had hoped for. They swam in the lake in the mornings, they hiked in the afternoons, they cooked long dinners and sat on the porch in the evenings and talked in the easy, unhurried way that was only possible when there was nowhere to be and nothing to check. On the third morning, one of them noticed the fish. There were a lot of them near the surface of the lake. This was not unusual in itself. Fish came to the surface for various reasons: temperature changes, feeding activity, the particular behavior of a lake with spring-fed water. But these fish were not feeding. They were simply floating near the surface, drifting with the slight movement of the water, not dead, still moving enough to maintain their position, but not behaving the way fish normally behaved. They mentioned it over breakfast. One of them suggested a change in water temperature. Another suggested something in the runoff from the recent rain. They noted it and moved on. By the afternoon, there were more of them, and they were closer to the shore. That evening, one of the couples went down to the water's edge after dinner. The fish were everywhere along the shoreline now, dozens of them just below the surface, drifting slowly in a way that was beginning to feel less like normal fish behavior and more like something else, something deliberate. They took a photograph and sent it to a friend who knew about lakes and wildlife. The friend called back within the hour. He said he had looked at the photograph carefully. He said he did not have an explanation for the behavior. He said fish occasionally came to the surface when oxygen levels dropped in deeper water. But he said the behavior in the photograph did not look like oxygen depletion to him. He said oxygen-deprived fish were agitated. These fish were calm. He said he had never seen fish behave quite like this. He said it looked almost like they were waiting. Nobody swam on the fourth day. The fish were still there, more of them now. The surface of the lake near the shore was thick with them, a slow-moving layer of bodies just beneath the surface, all of them oriented toward the land. On the fourth night, one of them woke at 3 a.m. She lay in the dark listening to the cabin. She could hear the lake through the open window. The water moved differently at night, a quieter sound, the small lapping of the shoreline in the dark. But underneath it she could hear something else. Not a sound exactly, more of an absence of sound. The particular quality of the air outside the window when she lay still and listened was the quality of a space that was very full and very quiet at the same time. She got up and went to the window. She looked out at the lake. The surface was completely still, and in the moonlight she could see them, not just near the shore now, the entire surface of the lake. Every fish that had been drifting near the edges over the previous 2 days was now in the center, packed together in a dense mass just below the surface, all of them facing the cabin. She woke the others. All 4 of them stood on the porch in the dark and looked at the lake. Nobody said anything for a long time. Then one of them said they should leave. Nobody argued. They packed in the dark and put their bags in the cars and drove out on the forest road before the sun came up. They drove in silence for a long time. Eventually, one of them said what all of them were thinking. He said the fish had not frightened him exactly. He said it was something else. Something closer to the feeling of being in a place and slowly realizing that the place was already occupied. that whatever the lake contained had tolerated their presence for 3 days, and on the fourth night had decided to make it clear that the tolerance had limits, and that the invitation to leave was not something they should decline. They did not go back for their security deposit. They did not contact the rental company to explain why they had left 3 days early. They simply drove away from the lake in the dark and did not look back. But all 4 of them would say afterward that the image that stayed with them was not the fish packed together on the surface of the water. It was the stillness of the lake when they had stood on the porch and looked out. The way it sat there in the moonlight, patient and dark and full, waiting to see what they would do, and completely unsurprised when they chose to run.